Okay, so I want to start with this People magazine cover. This recent People magazine cover has generated a great deal of controversy over the past few weeks. Countless gossip pages, respected news sources, and websites have been condemning and weighing in on 23-year-old Heidi Montag's recent plastic surgery spree, which included a total of 10 procedures. Headlines make proclamations and diagnoses like addiction and extreme self-hate or self-esteem problems, and some even speculate that it stems from the emotional abuse coming from her husband. But what they don't point to as a cause or culprit, because they're part of it themselves, is an unremitting and increasingly prevalent culture of surveillance that's a growing part of youth media today, and may have played a part in Montag's obsession with trying to attain the ideal femininity. Montag, for those of you who haven't seen an Us Weekly cover in the last 4 years, is Lauren Conrad's friend turned enemy on MTV's hit reality show, The Hills. Montag, through a variety of publicity stunts and staged photographs, has taken celebrity self-promotion to new nauseating heights with her slimy, manipulative, and conniving husband, Spencer Pratt. But this paper is not about telling you that Montag and the women of the Hills are subpar feminist icons. The average viewer can determine that on their own. Instead, the viewers come for the drama marqueed as reality, the clothes, the restaurants, and even the music playing ever so constantly in the background of a beautifully and carefully constructed Los Angeles. Most importantly, for my purposes here, Montag's recent escapades under the knife and the controversy surrounding it illustrates an overall tension and the blatant contradictions between the production of an empowering girl culture on MTV on the one hand and the disciplinary practices of femininity that are part and parcel of that girl culture on the other. Using The Hills as an illustrative text, I'm going to discuss the relationship between surveillance and disciplinary femininity in general, in order to understand the contradictory tensions surrounding surveillance for young women like Montag in today's mediated environment. In order to do this, I'll contrast the girl's rhetoric of empowerment and claims to be role models with the ways in which this show's surveillance practices and ties to consumer culture are helping to produce, reproduce, and strengthen some of the disciplinary aspects of femininity that already operate in society. I'll do this by reading The Hills through the lens of Sandra Lee Barkey's 1990 critique of Foucault's theory on the discipline tied to surveillance. This is a little review of it. I don't have time to go into it in depth, so hopefully you guys have a basic understanding of it. Before the invasion of reality TV, the explosion of social networking sites, Twitter, and other popular forms of surveillance, Barkey critiqued Foucault's theory on the disciplinary practices tied to surveillance in order to open it up to the discussion of gender. She writes, quote, Foucault treats the body throughout as if it were one, as if the bodily experiences of men and women did not differ, and as if men and women bore the same relationships to the characteristic institutions of modern life. She questions, where is the account of the disciplinary practices that engender the docile bodies of women, bodies more docile than the bodies of men? Barkey uses Judith Butler's understanding of femininity as an artifice and as a mode of, quote, enacting and reenacting received gender norms in order to examine the ways in which women's bodies are subjected to excessive forms of disciplinary practices that in turn produce the feminine body. These are pictures of women who have proven that femininity is an artifice, and they draw attention to its performative aspects, which Barkey is banking on. Barkey focuses on three main ways that women's bodies are disciplined. One, to be a certain size and configuration. Two, to embody certain gestures with restricted movement. And three, to display their bodies as ornamented surfaces. Implicit in her analysis is that women, more than men, are and have historically been the objects of both actual and virtual gazes that regulate these practices. Thus, they are subject to more disciplinary practices of surveillance than men. But now, as surveillance becomes an even more encroaching aspect of popular culture, I argue that these practices are heightened, not just in the extreme on shows like The Hills, but for most girls who participate in mediated surveillance online, in virtual worlds, or on social networking sites. The original Young Women on the Hills, the star Lauren Conrad, her co-worker Whitney, her roommate Audrina, and her ex-best friend Montag, as well as the newer members, are all perfect manifestations of the docile body of femininity, which becomes apparent through their weekly performances on the show, but is particularly visible on their May 2008 Rolling Stone cover shot. Notice how they all represent the ideal style of the feminine figure in today's understanding. Well, a white, Western, affluent femininity, that is, which is traditional on television. They are taut, small-breasted, narrow-hipped, and slim like a young girl instead of a woman. And although they rarely discuss dieting on the show, which Barkey suggests is a method of disciplining this body, multiple scenes on the show have centered on Lauren working out, a manifestation of a disciplinary practice, which on the show, instead of being discussed as such, is laden with the aspirational rhetoric of self-determination and self-improvement, which is a staple in the reality television genre. Moreover, the girls' gestures and posturing in this cover shot reflect Barkey's notion that women are far more restricted than men in their manner of movement and their lived spatiality. In line with Barkey's argument, notice how they keep their arms close to their bodies. Their backs are arched, low, and passive. Their knees are bent, and while only 2 of the 4 actually direct their gaze at the camera, they do so in a coy and passive flirt, receding away from it. The girls exemplify the confined and restricted disciplinary practices of the feminine body, which they have been taught and expected to enact most of their life, according to Barkey. For me, this enactment, instead of being natural or real, as the show likes to promote, appears as a performance, interpolated and exaggerated by the act of being surveyed by the cameras. The girls on the hills know how to pose for the camera. Because of their participation under surveillance, their movements are also severely controlled and restricted, representing how contemporary practices of surveillance can exaggerate and exasperate the disciplinary practices of femininity, originally described by Barkey. This excessive discipline is especially apparent when looking at how the show's surveillance is inextricably tied to consumerism and the demands of the market. As Elizabeth Afuso notes in her analysis of the show's embedded ties to corporate sponsorship in a recent Jump Cut article, quote, through a series of corporate partnerships with companies such as Bolt House Productions, Epic Records, Teen Vogue, and Extension, their parent corporations, the narrative of the Hills exists to promote these companies, arguably solely to promote these companies. The girls' movements are therefore restricted to those clubs and institutions that the show's corporate that are tied to the show's corporate sponsorships, such as attending Lady Gaga's concert, which was the new IT artist for Epic Records. This is not to mention the fact that the girls have to plan out their schedules with MTV producers at the beginning of each week in order to secure the proper permits for filming, or that their celebrity statuses have impacted the production of the show because flashing light bulbs can disturb possible scenes. Oh, this one's not working. This is a picture of Teen Vogue and the girls posing on the cover talking about their fashion. The girls also enact Barkley's third manifestation, which is displaying their bodies with ornamental surfaces, which is heightened to the level of excess through the show's ties to consumerism. In her discussion, Barkley focuses on the women's expected arrangement of hair and makeup and cosmetics, and the girls definitely live up to this with their highly stylized makeup and always perfect hair. They're particularly illustrated of clothing and fashion, though, which is Lauren's goal on the show to become a fashion designer. So they're always displaying their clothing. Now I want to draw your attention to a different Telling magazine cover. In this issue of Us Weekly, Stephanie Pratt, a secondary character on the Hills, goes into detail about her addiction to drug and alcohol at a young age, and how even after rehab, her interaction with her surgically and cosmetically enhanced castmates on the Hills drove her to bulimia. Despite this perfectly staged PR confession about how the disciplinary practices of femininity under increased surveillance had pushed her to one of the most destructive bodily extremes, Pratt later claimed to MTV News that, quote, "The Hills did not make me bulimic. It was my own issues with self-esteem, and if anything, my life on the Hills has only helped me get healthy, because I know how lucky I am to have this job, and to have the chance to be a role model, end quote. Pratt continued by saying that she wanted to shed light on eating disorders to help parents recognize whether children have the same problem. Pratt's sentiment, as representative of the Hills philosophy and MTVs, is a perfect example of how third-wave feminism, and post-feminism in particular, have problematically embraced the visibility of a feminine consumer culture. At one time, second-wave feminists vehemently critiqued this type of visibility as limiting and counterproductive to the goals of feminism. But contemporary feminists, many of whom have tried to distance themselves from the pedantic nature of second-wave feminism, hope that this visibility will transform the kind of empowerment tied to being recognized as an important market segment into a social or political empowerment, usually represented in terms of a feminist subjectivity. And because The Hills is one of MTV's most profitable shows, at a time when it's struggling to keep up with an inherently dynamic youth culture in competition with the internet and other forms of media, its success illustrates how MTV has exploited and manipulated the visibility of this empowered female consumer culture to capitalize on the economic potential of its resultant feminine target demographic. The Hills illustrates how the popular culture of surveillance is implicated in the increasing engendering of docile bodies of femininity. Mark Andrejevic, a media theorist, claims that reality TV emerged to make our society more comfortable with the surveillance needed to drive the newly emerging online economy. By equating surveillance with self-expression and self-realization, he argues that reality TV rehabilitates Big Brother, so that we are more likely to give marketers information about ourselves. However, he fails to acknowledge the fact that the television industry, and MTV in particular, may have embraced surveillance and encourages participation in it because it produces, heightens, and encourages femininity as well. Femininity is an expensive construct that needs many products to help build it. And as we all know, the economic structure of television depends on selling products. In fact, because the advertising potential and corporate sponsorships are embedded so seamlessly into the narrative of The Hills and onto the bodies of its feminine stars, the show and its multimedia brand becomes the perfect answer to the challenges TV networks are facing with the increased use of DVRs, TiVos, and internet streaming, which skip over traditional advertisements. When she asked what she thought she represented as a brand, Lauren Conrad says, it's about empowering girls. You need to be yourself, you need to work hard, and you'll get there. With Lauren's comment, she's implying that in her visibility, she can act as a role model, despite, or maybe perhaps because of her role as human advertising billboard for the products of femininity. To her, surveillance is empowering despite its disciplinary aspects. The hard work that she speaks of is not that of labor in the traditional sense, but rather the labor of femininity, driven to excess under surveillance. Montag is laboring to excess to produce the perfect feminine body. And however hard it might be for Conrad, Montag, and the others, it has nonetheless given them immense economic empowerment and role model status, but maybe not in the ways they think. They are walking contradictions for young girls who may be struggling to understand not only the relationships between femininity and feminism, but also what it means to participate under surveillance. In her effort to reach an unreachable ideal of femininity, Montag spent $30,000 on her plastic surgery spree. But this doesn't even come close to matching the billions of dollars that make up the cosmetic, fashion, and hair industries in the United States, which all advertise on television. The television industry has long been critiqued for promoting consumption and promoting femininity as a means to more consumption. But as we begin to see more women like Montag, who are at younger ages becoming obsessed or addicted with the perfection of femininity, we have to be aware of the countless influences that are contributing to this type of destructive female identity, surveillance being one of them. And as shows like The Hills and other reality shows make it more and more appealing to be under surveillance, and as teens freely embrace social networking sites where they survey each other, I can't help but think that all this surveillance is going to continually promote a disciplinary femininity that strips so many girls of the individuality and personality that makes them unique and restrict their freedom to pursue something more rewarding or more quote-unquote empowering than the ideal construction of female identity, which Montag is striving for.